Hi, my name is Sky. This video is a synopsis of the interview that I held with pastry chef and artist Claire Smyth, who is the sole owner and manager of a bakery called the Butter Project Chicago that is located in Rogers Park. My interview with Claire specifically was focused on conflict control, especially I felt that it was especially notable in terms of this year in running a business, being that there's a pandemic going on. So the questions that I asked Claire mostly surrounded those ideals and managing her business that way. Now the thing about Claire's business, which I didn't learn until we started the interview, is that she has no employees, she has no helpers, no workers, it's simply just her. But that being said, she still does have a sense of management that she has to have in running her business. So my questions were pretty helpful, still in terms of my point, in terms of my thesis for my interview. So let's get into it. The first thing I asked Claire was, would you consider your management style a conservative one, or one that allows for the growth and development of yourself and your employees in the sense that they are able to effectively progress in the business or with the use of their skills in the industry? Claire's response to that, being that she doesn't have any employees, was more so surrounding herself. She discussed that she was a rather relaxed individual who is essentially triggered by chefs who essentially are the well-known model of Gordon Ramsay, Hell's Kitchen, and who are aggressive or, rude to their employees. She's never been that kind of leader in the industry. She has been a manager of employees. She has had people she had to, tell what to do, how to do this, where to do this, when to do this, etc. She has worked at a few notable places in Chicago, such as she worked for the Chicago Pastry Administration. And while doing that, she ended up working in a few high-end hotels or, notable places in Chicago where very popular, very well-known people have gone to try her work and experience her work. So in doing that, she has come across situations where she has had head chefs be extremely rude, extremely frustrated, extremely angry, extremely aggressive towards their employees, towards herself, and she finds that that kind of management style has never exactly been effective. It grasps a hold of the minds and the kind of the hearts of the employees in the sense that they don't want to come to work every day. Some people may feel influenced by that. They may feel, he's been harsh on me and everything. He just wants better for me. Now that may be the case, but sometimes that kind of behavior, that kind of environment can negatively impact the product, what you're producing, what's going out. For example, if there is a lot of trouble, what goes on in the kitchen is what is most important about producing a essentially perfect or very notable product that will bring employees back and let your business continue. Because if there are negative employee relationships, there's not going to be effective communication. There's not going to be effective learning, effective teaching. There's just going to be this hostile environment that essentially invites hate and invites anger and invites just overall just negative kind of energy, for lack of a better word, that goes into what you're making and that goes into the spirit of the establishment you're running. People aren't going to want to come back if they feel like this is a hostile environment. I can hear people screaming in the kitchen or yelling at each other and blah, blah, blah. That's not a peaceful environment to enjoy your lunch or to enjoy your dinner. It's Hell's Kitchen, essentially, and that's one of the things that she talked about the most, how important it is to have a good relationship, have a good conversation pattern with your employees and with the people you're working with so that you can produce things that are just as positive and just as notable, and people love it seems. And you also, as an employee, you don't want to have a high employee turnover because your personality is not that great, your attitude is not that great. Then you don't have a business. You keep losing out on people, losing out on these personalities, the skills, the talent you need to run this business. So the next question I asked her was, what are 2 examples of an issue or conflict you've encountered that has resulted in some personal recognition of something that you as the owner or manager could have done differently to better help an employee or customer feel better served? So her first example was that she was 24 years old, a sous pastry chef. It was a very hard day that day. She said they had around 500 orders. They hadn't been able to fully close the restaurant that night because they needed to get started on these orders kind of early to actually be able to get them done. She said it was the first time that she did it, and what happened was the environment had become very hectic. Everyone was under a lot of pressure. Things were going wrong here, things were going wrong there, and things were burning, things were not mixed right, the textures weren't right, the colors weren't right, the sweetness of things weren't right, some things were too salty. Everything just seemed to be going wrong because everybody was so fast-paced, so rushed, not focused, not relaxed or anything. So she eventually blew up at one of her employees, and the employee had started crying. And she said it was at that moment that she realized that there needed to be some organization of emotions, of feelings, and of, employee relations with their managers and with their, the people who are up higher than them, because she said she hadn't been effectively communicating with the people who were around her because she was so focused on what she was doing. She just kind of said, hey, I gave you the training. This is what you need to do. This is what needs to be done. She realized, we get trained on things and, get told how to do things over and over until we finally get them. But when there's so much pressure in an environment like that, one that's such a people-pleasing environment, one that's such an environment that's heavily runs heavily on just the satisfaction of a person directly. You're feeding people, you're giving them these things that they need to be satisfied with immediately, or they won't come back. You won't have a business. You won't have customers. So she realized how important it was that the environment that an individual worked in was a positive one, even when it was pressurized, even when it was heavy. It needed to be one. Again, it goes back to that idea that a kitchen is a very important. The kitchen is the most important place for a restaurant or that kind of establishment to have these positive relationships, because again, that product that you're producing directly impacts the customers, and if you aren't, as employees and as a manager aren't working together to make sure things are done correctly, done right, you can't have that team feel to you. If you can't work together and figure things out, then nothing good is gonna come out of it. The next question I'll talk about for lack of time that I thought was very important was, has your management style changed or progressed at all due to the COVID-19 pandemic outside of adjusting to state and federal regulations of food service business? Her answer goes back into the whole emotional aspect of things, because we are humans, we are people, we feel things, we experience things. There are things outside of our jobs that impact us every day, probably more so than our work does, especially if our job is not something that's, our career, our focus. Or if it is, it's the things in our personal lives impact us very much so, and it's very important that we have people in our lives and in our work stuff to understand that we are humans, we feel things, and that even though we're, I guess, supposed to have a separation between our work and our personal lives, sometimes we can't help it. Most of the time, we can't help it. So, she says that it has made her more compassionate and more understanding socially. In terms of people, there's so many things that have been going on this year. The pandemic itself, there's been protests, the presidency, there is lots of talks and issues surrounding sexual abuse and the physical abuse and mental abuse of children, immigration and ICE, just all of these things going on around us that impact us more than we think they do. And she says that her experiencing all these things has made her more compassionate as a worker, as someone who works for the public, who serves the public, because it goes back to the whole idea we are people, we have feelings, and businesses are businesses. And there's a separation, a line in between those things that we have to realize is there, and that helps us to kind of communicate with one another, and that communication has to be a positive experience in order for things to work, in order for things to be effective, in order for people to come back to your business. So, overall from this interview, I got that being compassionate and being a genuine human being first, before being a rude or angry or frustrated manager, even though that is also, an emotional experience as someone who's running a business and has so much on their backs, is very important, very critical to managing a business, very important. Again, it's the main focus that without these relationships you don't have teamwork, and without teamwork you have nothing. There's no communication, there's no functioning, everything just falls apart. So that is my interview with Claire Smyth, again, who is the breakfast pastry chef of the Butter Project Chicago, located in Rogers Park. Thank you guys for watching, and thank you for listening.